Everybody, welcome to our next webinar. It's a pleasure and honor to bring to you a dear friend of mine, Pascal Finette. Pascal, a pleasure to have you here.
So good to be here.
Yeah, so those of you who are members of our Singularity University community know Pascal for all the incredible programs that you've run over the years, heading our entrepreneurship. Let me do an appropriate interview and introduction for our interview here. So Pascal is the co-founder at Radical Ventures and Singularity University's Chair of Entrepreneurship and Open Innovation. He got started on the net before there was a web browser. Did we have
I am literally that old, yes.
Founded a series of technology startups and was an early employee at eBay, at Mozilla, and at Google.org. Most recently, he built Singularity University's startup program, including SU's Accelerator and Venture Fund, and thank you for that amazing work.
Of course.
Further, he founded the nonprofit organizations Mentor for Good and the Coaching Fellowship. He's focused on helping really change the world of entrepreneurship. You have a newsletter called The Heretic, which is read by tens of thousands of change makers globally. So, Pascal, super excited to really continue the conversation that you've started with so many SU grads, with our Abundance Digital community, and thank you for coming down to our studios here at XPRIZE.
Thanks for having me.
For the day. Let me begin by asking you, what are you most excited about these days?
So many things, right?
Yeah.
I mean, all the things you talk about in terms of like the world really shifting to an abundant world. And allowing us to build really new types of companies. So I'm really interested in, for me personally, the work is really, what I get excited about is how do businesses and their business models shift in this new world? Because we see, of course, many new business models emerge. And for me, the fascinating question is less the ground truth, right? Like ground truth for me is we're moving to subscription models, or you move to software as a service models, or as a service models. I'm much more interested in like what is the 15,000 feet view, not like like the very extrapolated view, 30,000 feet, what happens macroeconomically. There's a lot which changes there, of course, as well. But really, what does it actually mean on the strategy side for a company? And particularly interested in what does it mean for what you would call SMEs, small and medium-sized businesses, because they're the backbone of our economy.
And it's interesting, right? Because the challenge is the rate of change is so fast that when you're starting a company, I remember one of the stories I wrote about, I think in Abundance, when I met the founders of Siri. When they started Siri, they projected where the tech would be in 3 years. And they built the product to intercept sort of bandwidth, processing speed, and natural language processing. And it really hit me that they said if they had built the product for what the technology existed at the time when they started, by the time they delivered it would have been out of date.
100%.
And that's also true for business models too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what's fascinating to think about is so one advantage you have today as a company, particularly as a smaller company, is you can actually you're not building a lot of this stuff, right? Like you're making bets on like outsourced services, which allows you to really focus on where's the value creation for you and your customer. So if you make the right smart bets, you can actually not worry yourself with like where's technology going to be in particular fields, right? But you can really think about like where is my customer and their problem going to be in a particular field in 3 to 5 to 10 years, and focus on the value creation there, and basically have all the other stuff being taken care of by many what we call infrastructure companies.
Interesting, because if you think about it, you don't worry that Google's not providing you the best searches, right? You use Google for your search engine and just assume that they're going to be improving their software all the time, versus if you had built it as a part of what you needed to do, you'd have to be improving it.
That's
so
right.
The more you can outsource to, as you call, infrastructure companies, they're killing themselves to provide the best product and maintain your business.
Absolutely.
And you could just assume that you're always riding on top of the best available capabilities.
Yeah,
and focus on your brand, focus on your customer.
And you know what I find really fascinating in all the research we're doing in this field at the moment is, so this was true for software for quite a long time. So a good example is, of course, There were once 3 engineers. They took 552 days to create a company which was used by 30 million people, sold it to Facebook for $1 billion, which of course is Instagram.
Yeah.
They didn't need to write any of the software, right? Like all these 3 engineers wrote was the photo filters and the sharing software. They didn't write the camera software, they didn't write the operating system, right? Android or iOS. That was all given to them. And as you say, rightfully, the companies underneath that, right, the Apples and the Googles of this world, they kept pushing this forward. So you could just write and focus on the value creation of your particular product. But now we're seeing it also in physical goods, which is really fascinating. So think about...
It is fascinating.
Right. Think about, there's a good example in my world, which is, you think Casper. Mm-hmm. So Casper is this company which makes basically one product. It's a mattress. The genius they had was that they saw that if you take a foam mattress, you suck the air out, it becomes so small that you can actually roll it and then put it into a box and ship it with like normal shipping ways, right? So they disrupt the industry. Casper is 4 years old. They're making $400 million in revenue, have 600 employees, have a valuation of $1.1 billion US, making a mattress.
I'm just going to pause 1 second because that is insane.
Right.
Right. A single. I mean, who would if you're an investor, an entrepreneur, and someone said, "Listen, I'm going to make a mattress, and that's all I'm going to make, and I'm going to try and get to $1 billion valuation in 4 years," that would sound crazy.
It does, right? And the interesting thing is, Casper doesn't even manufacture the mattress, right? They don't ship it, they don't warehouse it. All that is outsourced, right? And they outsource it again. They outsource it to partners who will do their own to keep up with tech.
So every partner is committed to being the very best. So there's continuous improvement process, even though Casper is not driving it or requiring it. Mm-hmm. And so what does Casper do?
So mostly what they're doing is product development, as in rethinking the product, marketing, which makes them really good, brand management, and customer support. Right? The same is true for, there's a beautiful example here in the US again. There's a shoe company called Allbirds, which is like the Instagram darling, basically. 3-year-old company. They service 1 million customers by now, make $100 million in revenue, 200 employees, right? Same deal. They don't manufacture anything, they don't warehouse it, they don't ship it. All they're doing is, social media marketing, which they're really good at. They create a great brand around it and have a valuation of $1.4 billion, which I find so interesting because we are now seeing, like physical good companies, basically by leveraging the techniques software companies have pioneered, now getting into the same valuation game.
So is it an exact duplicate? So Allbird as well, it's brand management and marketing and product vision? Mm-hmm. I mean, is there anything else these companies are doing?
Not much, actually. And it seems to be enough.
And so as long as you can assemble the stack mm-hmm. of the components for it and fulfillment and such, then it allows you to go from, and also they're almost infinitely scalable, right? Because if you pick the right suppliers, those suppliers can go 0 to 100 instead of just 0 to 1.
Yeah. One thing, though, is, and our research shows this, is there is a little bit of a natural barrier to the scale, which is this. These companies tend to be specialized products for specialized customers. So they go into a very specific niche. So, for example, Allbirds caters to, like the millennial, the style-conscious, affluent millennial, basically, in urban centers. That limits them, of course, in their growth to a certain extent. So they can penetrate that market, they can go into that market, but there's a certain limitation in their growth. What we see these companies do now as a next step is they tend to, yes, they grow their product offering a little bit. So Allbirds just introduced socks, right? So kind of makes sense. You sell shoes, you sell socks. Makes sense.
Right?
Yeah, adjacencies. Right. Casper sells you pillows, right? But much more fascinating for us is that we are now seeing companies which take their model and replicate the model into other industries. So a good example is Method. Method makes cleaning products, like dishwashing, liquid, etc. Their big kind of like claim to fame was they put them into really beautifully packaged product packaging, mm-hmm. meaning that you're actually proud to show off your dishwashing liquid on your shelf instead of like hiding it under the counter. They became pretty big, but with that brand, you can only do so much, right? You can only do washing liquid. They took the learnings from this and applied it to the vitamin and mineral market and started a company called Ollie. So they took the same insight, which is if you buy vitamins or minerals as a supplement, they often look like you have a disease, right? Seriously, they look like they come in these like bottles with like the prescription stuff on it, right? And you put them on your shelf and people are like, man, are you sick, you know? And what they did is they created beautiful packaging around it. And the other interesting thing is they found like people don't like taking tablets, particularly for stuff like which is non-medical. So they wrap this stuff into little gummy bears, right? So basically you eat gummy bears. It's beautifully packaged, so you put it on a shelf and people are fine with it. So it's fascinating to see these companies replicating themselves into other industries to get to scale.
Incredible. So one of the things that I have felt for a while is that economics today is very broken. The classical economic indicators and reporting structures don't account for any of the sharing economy, don't account for the fact that, you know, on your device here you've got millions of dollars of free stuff. So you mentioned to me that your next book here is going to be in the area of economics. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely, and I think you're spot on. I mean, it goes from anything from like how broken measuring GDP is, right, as a measure of like an economics output. All the way down to things which are much more fundamental in its economic structure. So there's a good example we found for our book. So in our book, we're looking at how do markets shift.
What are you calling the book right now?
So
we'll promote it to you once it's available.
That's awesome, yeah. So the book, the working title is Hourglass Economics. And the main premise of the book is this. In most markets, particularly consumer markets, for the last 40 years, what we've seen is what is called the product pyramid. Product pyramid is basically you have a high margin, low volume product at the top. Typically these were luxury goods. And then you've got the exact opposite at the bottom. And what now happens is that we're seeing this pyramid shifting more towards an hourglass shape. Okay. The top gets bigger, the bottom gets bigger, the stuff in the middle starts to disappear. Good example in fashion is you have Allbirds growing at the top, you know, specialized product for a specialized customer. You have Primark, H&M, Zara, so fast fashion growing at the bottom. And you've got the Gap basically disappearing. And the Gap, their whole reason for existence was they gave you a good product at a fair price.
Yeah.
Now the challenge is, because of all the things, you know, we're talking about, you're talking about, for example, production has become so much better that you now get better product quality at much lower prices, right? You can walk into Uniqlo, buy a $5, $10 t-shirt. And I guarantee you will have this t-shirt for 10 years, right? It doesn't fall apart anymore. Which is interesting because again, in GDP, for example, we don't measure this, right? We don't measure the fact that the stuff you put in your shelves, the stuff you have at home now lasts forever, right? So it's fascinating to think about this from a macroeconomic perspective. But if you look at it on a company's perspective, on a business model perspective, if you have a $10 t-shirt, why would you buy a $25 t-shirt from the Gap, which, you know, the brand you probably don't care all that much about? I mean, I have yet to find someone who's like saying, I'm a proud Gap. I don't know. I mean, they might be out there. So what people tend to do is they tend to either buy the $10 t-shirt or they buy the $100 t-shirt, which has there's a brand story behind it and so on.
And in fact, the fact that it's $100 is part of the meaningful story.
Of course, absolutely.
So let's talk about brand, because I'm super fascinated by, will brand survive and will brand be meaningful? Part of this conversation in my mind is that a lot of the purpose of brand is for someone to show an affiliation or to show their wealth, right? I'm going to buy a Louis Vuitton bag because I can afford it. Where's brand going?
Absolutely. So in my world, brand used to be about signaling exactly what you just described, as well as trust, right? Like you buy a Louis Vuitton handbag to signal, but you also trust that it's of great quality. Trust is going away, right? We don't need trust anymore because...
or we don't need trust by the brand.
Correct.
We can get trust from other places.
Correct, because now we have, say for example, in the hotel industry, you needed to, like you went to Marriott because you trust them that the hotel is great. No, you just go on TripAdvisor, you can find out, right? You don't need to trust the brand anymore.
In fact, you can find a narrow niche, specialized hotel that is amazing.
Absolutely.
But you would have never trusted, Pigeon by the Sea as a name of a...
Yeah, exactly. That's it, right? So brands, in my world, brands actually still matter, but they really matter around the signaling component. So that becomes stronger and stronger and stronger. And it actually shows because you take, for example, there's a company called Patagonia and there's a company called North Face. They make basically the same product, which is outdoor gear, etc. I would postulate the quality of the product is equal, but one company, Patagonia, because they have a really strong brand, they have a meaning behind the brand, there's a social movement around the brand, makes significantly more money on their products, right? Like we pay premium for it. Whereas North Face, like they don't stand for a lot. So the signaling goes down, meaning we can make less money on it.
And it's interesting, going back to Allbird and Casper, their value add is ultimately their marketing and their brand. And so one of the things that in entrepreneurs, advising entrepreneurs, which we both do, is getting clarity about what is your brand in the most concise, focused area. And companies that go after way too many products and way too many things have a reduced brand valuation, and you don't actually see the huge value that you're getting in brand in Casper and Allbird.
Yeah, absolutely. And to add to something you talk quite a bit about, of course, which is the massive transformative purpose.
Yeah.
Right. Brands actually need to have a purpose.
Yeah.
Right. So you need to, and again, like Patagonia is a beautiful example for this, where we really affiliate ourselves with Patagonia and what they stand for, and they're kind of like, to a certain extent, they're a social movement, right? Like protecting the environment and the wildlife, etc. So brands matter a lot, but brands also need to stand for something. And then you can't just stand for something, you actually need to take the action towards it.
Yep. It can't just be words, it has to be backed up by demonstrated value that people see. So trust, let's talk about trust a little bit more. One of the things you mentioned to me earlier was this idea of the Amazon 4-star store. So what's that mean?
So the Amazon 4-star store, which they have one in New York City, I visited recently, is a really interesting concept because it turns retailing on its head. What the 4-star store does is, so it's an Amazon physical store where every single product in the store was rated by Amazon buyers and 4 stars.
And therefore millions of people.
Millions of people, that's the whole point, right?
Yeah.
4 stars or above. What this creates is this, first of all, is a very weird hodgepodge of products in there, like literally anything, like from cooking utensils to books to electronics. But you walk in the store, and it happened to me, you inherently trust that every single product on the shelf is good, right? Because you don't need to trust the brand anymore, you trust the reviews. Now, Amazon has curated those reviews for you by basically saying we only put products which have good reviews on these shelves. Meaning, I walked in this store, I needed some cooking utensils we needed to buy for friends. I just grabbed the stuff off the shelf. I don't look at the brand anymore. I don't care about the brand anymore, right? Like some were from OXO, some of them different kinds. I don't care, right? It shifts. It's really fascinating because it shifts the brand power away from the individual brand all the way up to Amazon. Because the only person I need to trust is that Amazon doesn't screw me over with the 4-star reviews, right? So as long as I trust Amazon, I can just buy anything in that store.
Amazing.
And it's crazy, it's crazy because it demonstrates like you only have 2 types of companies, right, in terms of brands. Either Allbirds or Patagonia or something. I deeply care about them. I'm a fanboy. Or I trust the intermediary who gives me who basically aggregates trust. And then if you think about what the blockchain might do in the future, you probably can get rid of the intermediary completely and just trust the blockchain.
Yeah, incredible. So it's interesting, right? Because a lot of what has gone on in the past is a company builds its brand and protects its brand as its most valuable asset. I think of Coca-Cola as an example. And then there's the use of influencers. Who have an individual brand. Influencer is a brand, and then by affiliation with that product, that influencer is sharing trust with their brand.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But there's this interesting idea of, we talked about economics earlier, right? So just to show you how broken economics, I believe, is today, in 1970, George Akerlof won the Nobel Prize for something called the theory of lemons. Theory of lemons basically says that the seller of a product knows more than the buyer of a product.
Mm-hmm.
And the example he gave is used cars, right? Like the used car salesman knows more about all the defects the car has. And what he showed is that as a rational human being, you know that. So you assume that the car is actually worse than what the seller tells you it is, right? Because the seller has an incentive to hide.
We're talking about lemons like car lemons.
Car lemons. Not physical lemons, right?
Okay.
So what happens then over time is that because you bid the lowest price, the seller will offer you over time worse cars because they can't make quite as much margin. So what Akerlof showed that in the 70s, basically every car you bought used was broken and terrible. That led to new business models like certified pre-owned, where you go to a dealership and they basically certify the car. Or you have a company like CarMax, which became massive, selling you used cars with a warranty. I believe you can literally like take that Nobel Prize, print it out, and rip it apart because it's not true anymore. Like we now know as a buyer, like we know as much about the product as the seller, right? Like you just go online, you find everything. It totally shifts the power and the market dynamics in this market, and it benefits newcomers.
Right. And so it allows you, through transparency and data, to be able to put forward a product that is new in the market by a small player and still have it valued as unique and meaningful by the buyer.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's jump into something that I'm fascinated by, which goes back to what allows a company like Casper and a company like Allbird to exist, which is this notion of, the term you use is infrastructure providers. Mm-hmm. So it used to be, and I think about this, I have a slide that talks about the cost of starting a internet-based startup today versus what it was just at the top of the dot-com bubble in 2000, yep. Right? And so back in 2000, if I wanted to create an internet startup to sell things, like I was just talking to Bill Gross, who started eToys, I would need to get so much, it was like $5 million to get to a basic startup, yep. Right? It was like I had to buy the server, I had to buy the bandwidth, I had to buy the software, I had to, but now you can literally start a company with minimal dollars and have massive scale and ride on this product improvement curve. So let's begin by define what you consider an infrastructure provider. And if you're thinking about starting a company, if you're an entrepreneur, if you're running a company and you're not using infrastructure providers, our friend Salim Ismail talks about this of being an exponential organization, right? Being an EXO, which means being as nimble as you possibly can, yep. Being untethered to assets and capabilities that you inherently had to build and then have to maintain. So, so part of using infrastructure providers across the board is being an exponential organization, being a nimble organization. So I want to dive into this a little bit because I'm fascinated by it, and I'd like to create a list that you can write down. And I'm going to actually, I think one of the things I want to do is create the most definitive list of entrepreneurial infrastructure providers, yep. And who they are and who's doing what. So define an infrastructure provider for me.
Yeah, sure. So this basically comes out of the software industry. What we've seen in the software industry for the last, 60 years is basically, when we started with software way back when, you needed to write everything, right? Like you wrote your own operating system and then you built your software on top of this. And over time, basically, this amount of stuff you needed to do has become much, much smaller, right? So nobody writes their own operating system anymore. You don't write your own database system anymore. You don't write your application server anymore. And that leads, to tie this back to what we talked about with Instagram, right? Leads to a world where like 3 engineers can build this company. Now we're seeing this reflected in non-tech industries as well. Mm-hmm. For a long time, of course, we know this, for example, in logistics. Like you would never dream of like running your own UPS or FedEx or USPS, right? Like you would never. So we've been doing that for a long time, but now we're doing it kind of everywhere. So anything from all your back office stuff, right? Like so your accounting, your hiring, your payroll processing, to the way you sell product online and offline, right? So anything from your payment provider to your shop provider, etc. Again, like you don't build any of that stuff anymore. What you do is you pick the best possible solutions for your particular use case, you combine them in interesting ways. You talk a lot about convergence, right? Like in some ways, this is also a form of convergence for me. So we converge these things together, and then you really just focus on what is it you do which nobody else can do.
Yeah, so I mean, it's fascinating. It's basically building a stack in which you're providing the very top layer and building on top of everybody else. And now part of it is, can you be competitive in that? How do you not have someone build the exact same stack and go directly into competition with you? So I'm curious about your thought there, and then I'd like to actually, if again, for maximal utility, let's talk about some of these different companies there, at least the ones that you're excited about.
Yeah.
So how do you maintain uniqueness and competitive advantage when you're building on top of a stack that's open to everybody?
Yeah, I think it goes back to, so if you think about product development over the last couple of years, probably last decades or so, has really shifted, and it's still not there yet, but it has really shifted towards a market-driven approach, right? Like the question we are asking is, what is the problem we are solving for the customer? If you solve that problem for your customers in the way the customer wants it, I would not worry about someone else copying you.
Interesting.
Because again, like the focus you should have is outward, not inward. Back in the day, we were all very inward focused because we needed to build all this damn stuff, right?
Yeah.
So you spend a lot of like your brain power on figuring out how do you set up a server? How do you what does your checkout process look like? Now you're like, whatever, we just like slap on Stripe and you're done, right? So I wouldn't worry too much about that. One thing I just want to make a note of is for everybody who's in the business of already running a business, right? So namely a legacy business and or an incumbent business, what we find for a lot of these businesses is they own too much of the stack. Yeah. Like traditionally, like they run their own warehouse when they shouldn't. They run their own manufacturing when they shouldn't. They have an IT guy who programmed their own website when you shouldn't. All these kind of factors. So there's a really important piece in there as a key learning, I think, for the community out there. Also that if you are in an existing business, figure out like which of this, like of the stack you should be running yourself, where you're actually competitive to the market, and where do you better outsource.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting because there is such a resistance to change. And the challenge is if someone comes in, for goodness sakes, there have been hundreds of mattress brands, right? And mattress stores.
Absolutely.
And why didn't they create what Casper created, right? Why didn't Kodak create what Instagram created? Because we defend our position, we don't question it.
Yeah.
And as soon as we start defending our position, no, we need to control that. You put yourself up for a lot of pain. And so that's a really great point of, one of the things you can do and probably should do is have some a team, a black ops team or whoever it is, come in and evaluate your stack and look at how you can reduce your cost, increase your agility, reduce your overhead of employee base, all of that. That's amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's in a different context, we talk about these, like what we call the four horsemen, which lead to disruption. Is basically like the things companies trip up over. And
what are the four?
So one of them is actually what you just described, which is this notion that it's subtle, but it's very dangerous. We call this the leverage what you have problem, which is if you are an incumbent company, you have, let's say, a factory. You've got some CapEx and OpEx deployed somewhere. There's a very strong tendency for you to use it, right? Because it's there. The best example for me is always when the last 10, 20 years, when we had this shift towards the cloud. I saw a lot of companies who had data centers, and they said, well, we have a data center, so we better use it, right? Like we just invested, I don't know, like we bought servers for $1 million, so like we can't do this Amazon thing because we just bought servers for $1 million. Yeah. But you put up yourself for a lot of pain because you're putting yourself at a competitive disadvantage, right, to someone who doesn't have that.
And stopping that, the psychology of saying I was wrong and I have to switch is so difficult.
Oh, of course.
The equivalent I think about, we just had, I spent some time with Hermes Nam recently, is the energy facility that has to shut down their coal plant to set up a solar facility.
Yep.
Right, and it's cheaper to install new solar than to keep running your coal plant. And that analysis is clearly going to be happening here because the scale of AWS and the software tools on top of AWS, compared to your own data centers, there's no comparison at the time.
Right.
So the four horsemen.
One is leverage what you have.
Yeah.
The first one is actually the challenge that you can't go into a business which has lower margins than your core business, right? Like the notion of like you're disrupting yourself by like going into a business where you know that this new business, say for example, you do an in-person experience, you know the future is digital. The digital typically has lower margins, like lower cost. You're not doing it, right? You can't cannibalize yourself. To your point, that's mostly a psychological thing. Yep. Which of course is the dumbest thing you can possibly do, because I guarantee you someone out there, like looks at this and says, wow, this is amazing because I'm going to cannibalize.
The perfect example is Kodak, right? It was in the paper and chemicals business, and it didn't want to cannibalize that profit center by going into digital photography. And what they forget is it's all about democratization. It's about increasing your marketplace 100-fold.
Yep, that's right. So those are two already. Then the third one is what our friend Salim Ismail talks a lot about, which is the immune system response. Right? And the easiest way I can explain this in my own words is that every company is good in innovation and exploration in the beginning because you don't have anything, right? You try things out. Then you get to product market fit, and then you shift into this mode of protecting the status quo. And there's actually nothing wrong with it because you need to make money. And that's where you make money, right? By like kind of milking the cow. The challenge is as you age as an organization, you calcify.
Yeah.
And then you get the immune system response.
And so is there a recommendation of what you recommend a company do to avoid the immune system response?
So I think to a certain extent you can't actually avoid it. I think you need to be aware of it. The other thing which I find...
so be aware, but I would say at a minimum, if you're going to create a new product, create it outside your company.
Correct. Yeah, or at the very least, like have different people work on it, right? So one of the interesting challenges I find with, and this is mostly true for larger corporations, but every once in a while there goes this like wave through the organization where they're like, oh, we all need to be innovative, right? And then everybody does like a design thinking workshop, which is kind of weird because we hire people into these organizations who are world champions, status quo protectors. They're really good at that. They are not innovative, and that's it. It's fine. We should acknowledge the fact, right? And I think there's a part where we put people into situations where they're actually really unhappy because we make them do stuff they're not good at. So as a corporation, I would always recommend like figure out like who are your people who are innovators and who are your people who are status quo protectors, and like understand you need both, but put them into the right places. And I think a lot of the pain we're going through is by trying to make everybody an innovator. And it just creates friction, a lot of friction. And then the last horseman is a little bit more nuanced, but this is based on a combined work McKinsey has done like 20-ish years ago or so, together with Geoffrey Moore actually developed a framework around this, which we call this the time horizon fallacy. So the idea is this. McKinsey showed that there's basically 3 time horizons. Time horizon 1 is here and now. Every company is good at that, otherwise you wouldn't exist. Time horizon 3 is research and development 10 years out. Some companies do this very well. A lot of companies don't even engage in it, which is fine. And then there's time horizon 2, which is the no man's land, the 5-year out. Right. The challenge with time horizon 2 is this, and let me tell you, I am a time horizon 2 person. I love being in time horizon 2. I've seen this play out many times. First is this. If you have a time horizon 2 project, it gets presented to the company applies time horizon 1 thinking to it and the metrics, right? When will it make me $1 million? When will you have X amount of customers? When will it be profitable? And the person in time horizon 2 says, I don't know. I don't know where this market goes, right? Because you don't know, like it's an emerging market, right? If you would have gone to Kodak and said, like, when will like digital take over? You're like, I don't know. Like we can make a guess, but we don't know. We just feel that it's going to be big. So a lot of the time horizon 2 projects die right there. They don't even get done. Then the second problem happens is, so time horizon 2 people get smarter, right? Like I got smarter, so you start lying. You basically go to the time horizon 1 people and say, here's the business plan, right? And frankly, every startup person knows this, because if you, as a startup person, write a business plan, it's all BS, right?
Of course.
So you learn this, right?
You're all optimists.
Yeah, of course.
And then you try and survive.
Yeah, right. Absolutely.
And then you make optimistic assumptions that reinforce. Just a quick aside. I was with Elon Musk at an event, and we're talking about the starting of Tesla, and he was saying what a miracle it was that Tesla existed, because he said, in the beginning when I invested in it, I only invested in it because I was told and convinced that the batteries existed for what we needed to do, and that the Lotus Esprit body would be adequate for our needs. So we didn't have to develop a body, we didn't have to develop batteries, and we would be able to generate cars and revenue in record time. And of course, none of that was true. They had to reinvent the batteries, had to modify the body, and it was much more expensive, took much longer. And it's always the case. It's very in fact, if it isn't the case, if you're being honest about the fact that something can be done quickly, you're going to try and stretch the capability or make it cheaper in order to increase the margins.
100%,
Yeah.
Absolutely. So then the second challenge is that when you get your Time Horizon 2 project off the ground, when Time Horizon 1 falls on hard times, so like economic goes down, whatever, they go to Time Horizon 2 and plunder the resources, right? Because they go they plunder the resources, they pull them out, right? They say, you're not making money, give me the engineers back.
And you kill your future.
You kill your future, exactly. So those are the four horsemen we identified. And again, like we see them in many, many companies play out. And the reason why we like talking about them is I believe that if you can name them, you can see them. And if you can see them, you can do something about it. But most companies we walk in, they can't even name them, right? The stuff happens, it brews. It's a little bit like culture, right? It's this thing which is like, it's in the ether. And it's happening, but it's really hard for companies to wrap their heads around.
Yeah, so it literally, it's a skill. You see it when you've gone through it, and that's where wisdom and experience actually mean something.
That's right.
All right, so let's continue on infrastructure providers. Let's roll down some of these infrastructure companies and talk about some of the ones that you're excited about.
Yeah.
So payroll.
Payroll. So let's do back office. So you've got anything from your accounting runs something like Xero, for example. Xero came on the market like about 10 years ago. Gives QuickBooks a run for its money, Australian company, highly rated. A lot of startups run on Xero these days.
And does that, is there an advantage over QuickBooks that you know of?
It's a really nice product. It's very nicely integrated. It's very fast. It's very clean interface.
And is it software as a service or you purchase it?
Yeah, software as a service.
Okay.
Yeah, all the stuff is software. Yeah, nothing you install these days, right?
Okay.
It's all lives
which
on
by the way allows it to be updated and features being added and so forth.
Absolutely.
Okay, so that's accounting is back office.
Yeah, so accounting back office, payroll. Personally, I'm a huge fan of Gusto.
And what does Gusto do?
Gusto basically does your whole payroll process, like literally from anything which is like all the nasty paperwork you need to do, like filing, like with the state authorities here in the US, etc., to payments and so on, in a beautiful interface. They're crushing it. It's an interesting company because they picked, a lot of these infrastructure companies take a very specific problem and then build the very best solution. Like you could not build this in-house, right? Because they're so obsessed about this one thing, which is payroll. Wow. Which is hard to, I find it hard to get excited about this, right? But I'm excited about using that product because it's really, really good.
And that is, I think you mentioned to me, it's like $5 per employee.
Yeah, $5 per employee.
So it's de minimis.
Nothing. Yeah, totally.
What else goes in the back office these days?
You had a good solution for hiring, right? Like we don't do all that much hiring, but...
So, one of the things I think about is hiring is like one of the most important things that you do. And if you get it wrong, it's not just deficiency, it is a problem. And so there's companies like HireVue that use AI to analyze video interviews to give you information about the employees and help you scan and find. So I'm super interested in hiring solutions. Is there anything else in the back office that comes to mind?
Well, I think it then starts bleeding into other areas of your business. Of course, so first of all, like G Suite, right? Like Google everywhere, right? Yeah. Like you don't buy Word or Excel anymore. You just like use G Suite, costs you like $6 a user or something, and you've got like the whole thing, right? Yeah. And then you get into like, okay, so now how do we do payments, for example, right? And there's a company called Stripe, which is doing phenomenally well, and they became really famous because they allow every programmer to integrate Stripe checkout with a single line of code, right? Amazing. Like literally one line of code. It's amazing. It works really, really beautiful, like stress tested by thousands upon thousands of startups in this world. So
millions.
Really, yeah, right, exactly. You want to have an online shop, you go to Shopify, Canadian company, right? Like Canadian unicorn. By the way, what I find interesting about infrastructure is, because these infrastructure companies have become so important to the lifeblood of so many other companies, they all become unicorns themselves.
Yeah.
Right? So all these companies are massive in like their valuation and their importance. So again, like you want to have an e-commerce store, Shopify. Shopify just has become the second largest e-commerce site in the Western world.
Amazing.
They have overtaken eBay, which is crazy, right? And it's a great product. It's like, I guarantee you, if you buy something from an independent seller today, the chances are that their whole experience is done on Shopify. And you can tell because there's some like telltale signs about like how the Shopify experience looks like. It's beautiful. It's amazing. Nice. It takes you like 5 seconds to set up, right?
Amazing. And it literally can turn anybody into an entrepreneur.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. Like you set up your website with WordPress, it costs you what, $5 a month or something, right?
Yep.
Like you've got your website, you want to have an online store, you take that. It's really crazy. It's like you have an idea, you can build whatever you want in, to your earlier point, in like minutes.
And it's interesting, right? Because you can also use platforms like Kickstarter to actually get data about what people want at what price point and so forth.
Yep. Though there's an interesting, I don't know if you heard about this, but there's a really interesting thing in Kickstarter, which is because China has become so good and so fast at manufacturing that we now see people, they launch their campaign on Kickstarter, and the challenge with Kickstarter is that you have a 30-day time window, right, for which the campaign runs. Very often, particularly for items which are easier to manufacture, the Kickstarter campaign launches. By the mid of the Kickstarter campaign, you can go on Amazon and buy the same product from a Chinese manufacturer.
Amazing.
Yeah. So
amazing.
That's the danger of like this crazy world we're living in, where like information flows so fast.
I mean, one of the things I remember, I was on stage at Singular University with Steve Jurvetson and with Astro Teller, two amazing thinkers about tech, and we're talking about intellectual property and how it will become meaningless in the future, and how if you're depending on IP to protect you, you're shot, you're dead. Because by the time you release your product, it's been reinvented and improved by someone else using AI or nanotech, whatever.
Yep, I agree. I think it's, IP still matters in like some areas where you get into really deep tech.
Yeah.
Where it comes like out of universities or you spend like billions of dollars developing it. Sure. But everything else, like totally agree.
I'm just curious, are there companies out there that can be an infrastructure provider for physical manufacturing of your product, like out of China? I mean, do you know of any?
One of my favorite companies here is, so here's how this is really fascinating. So how we did outsource manufacturing in China, pre-internet was, you flew to China, you need to build up the relationships, a nightmare. Nobody could do it, right? Like only big companies can do it.
Yep.
Then the internet comes along and we get Alibaba. The challenge with Alibaba is it's kind of like a vast sea of mediocre, right? There's so many like vendors, the quality is typically not that great. Now there's a US company called Sourcify, and what Sourcify does is they have done the most amazing thing, which is they went to China, they sourced 6,000 factories for anything and everything. Like you want to make leather products, great. You want to make plastic, great. You want to make metals, great. They sourced them, they vetted them, and then they put all of them on standardized contracts. So as a company, I can now go on Sourcify and say, I need someone to make plastic products for me. They tell you, here's 5 companies we work with, here's what their pricing looks like, here's the standard contract you can use, so you don't need to have this like, lost in translation thing. Their average order size is only $30,000 for outsourced Chinese manufacturing, which is crazy, right? And the average saving you have over home manufactured, meaning like manufacture in Europe or the US, 64%.
That's impressive.
It's crazy, right?
That's impressive. And probably your ability to iterate rapidly is incredible.
Yeah. And then think about, like you combine this with, and of course we talk a lot about this, but you combine this with let's say you make a plastic product. You do injection molding, which is the plastics manufacturing process. The most expensive part about injection molding is making the die, which is the metal piece. Yeah. You forge that out of metal, costs you $100,000. Now we 3D print these things. Cost you like 1/100th of what it used to cost, right?
And easy to modify.
Yeah, and you make it in 12 hours,
yeah.
Right? So the world has become this really interesting hotbed for entrepreneurs. I'm so excited about it.
The active word is speed and agility.
Yeah.
And that comes, it's like what used to be your advantage is now a lead keel.
Yeah.
It holds you back. It doesn't allow you to change. And it's really how quickly can you shed all this weight and be sort of, as I like to say, surfing on top of the tsunami. I mean, those are amazing. What else is on your list of infrastructure companies?
Yeah, let me give you one interesting corollary to this, by the way, which is this. You know, you and I and like everyone in the S universe gets asked a lot, like, you know, what do we teach kids these days, right? And the typical answer we do is, you need to teach kids the skills which like a machine can't replicate, right? Like human skills, empathy, design thinking, etc. In a lot of ways, that's how we build companies these days, right? Because what you do is you're not focusing anymore on the mechanical part of building the company, like how do I run my back office, how do I manufacture. What you focus on is how do I actually create a relationship with my customers? How do I create a brand? How do I create meaning for my customer? How do I make a customer happy, right? Empathy. So it's really fascinating because in a lot of ways, like I see this parallel between, you know, like here's what we need to do in the education system to get our kids up to speed to like this new world. And here's the stuff we're actually doing in the business world.
That is a beautiful analogy. Thank you for that.
Hey, anyway.
I love that. And it's so true. It's like, you know, memorizing historical facts that you can Google easily enough, unless you love history, in which case, go for it. You know, I'd rather teach a child storytelling and empathy, and which are two-way communication skills.
Exactly.
Amazing. Beautiful.
Right. Yeah, and then I mean, in your infrastructure world, I mean, you've got also, of course, giants like Amazon, right? Amazon has more than 90 services they have made available to the world. And of course, most of us know what runs under Amazon Web Services, as in, you know, like the software infrastructure. But Amazon, for example, does end-to-end fulfillment for product. And what I find fascinating is you can actually do end-to-end fulfillment with Amazon without ever selling anything on Amazon. So Amazon doesn't even care if you sell it through Amazon. They basically just say, like, you want to have Amazon quality fulfillment, you know, like robotics and like pick, pack, ship, all that stuff, we'll do it for you. You want to sell on Shopify, not on Amazon, we don't care.
So fascinating, right? Because Amazon obviously was they built Amazon Web capabilities for their own use. And by getting more and more people to use it, it drives their cost down because they get to use it cheaper because they amortize it over low. And so the same thing so anything and everything they do, the more people who use it, the better.
Absolutely. Here's, by the way, an interesting a thought experiment you can do if you happen to be in an incumbent business. And we actually do this with our clients when I talk to CEOs, is you can look at your value stack and you say, well, what of the stack do I need to remove, as we talked earlier? But sometimes you find things in your stack where you're actually really good at. And then the question becomes, can you externalize this? I give you a super crazy example. So it was a little while ago, I was with a beer brewing company. And I asked them, so we had this conversation. I said, like, so, you know, like, explain to me, like, what are you doing? And we talk about this, and it occurred to me that they're really good at producing yeast, right? Because yeast is a thing in the beer process. And if you know anything about yeast is actually pretty, you know, delicate, like flour to like work with, or bacteria in this case. Now, if you know anything about the synthetic biology world, we take yeast, genetically modify it, and basically turn it into a little factory. Penicillin is made out of yeast, of course. So I went to them and said, like, have you ever thought about outsourcing your yeast capacity to the synthetic biology industry? And they looked at me with like huge eyes, like, what are you even talking about, right? What are you smoking, bro? So I showed them a video of yours, right? And I'm like, you should watch this, right? And I'm like, so they get it. So they start getting it. And then they start making a couple calls. And now they're working with a pharma company to actually run a prototype where they use the yeast capacity they have developed for beer brewing, yeast as a service.
So it's interesting, right? This is the sharing economy applied to large companies. And one of the things I think about for companies is to say, listen, you have a set of things that are still inherent to you that you could share with startups. So one of the things for me is like, do you have assets, you have a brand, you have clients, you have cash, and you have data, and you keep those things to yourself. But if you were to share access to your data, access to your clients, access to your cash, and so forth, you can, in fact, think of this in the sharing economy, help foster the birth of startups that you can own a portion of, minority of, and have them experiment in ways that you might not otherwise.
Yeah, absolutely. And a good example for this is in my world is you just look at Salesforce, right? Like the CRM software, Salesforce.com. They have a massive, massive developer ecosystem, like literally millions of solutions, which the interesting thing is, and this goes into like the world of open innovation then, is a lot of those solutions would not been financially feasible for them to produce, right? Because it's like too much work, too small a niche market. They would have probably never thought about producing those, right? So by opening yourself up and really seeing yourself much more as a platform play, like you have massive powers.
Yeah, that is fascinating because the more people that use you, the more you find their needs, the more they find your bugs, the more you improve, the lower your costs are. It's a virtuous cycle.
That's right.
That's extraordinary.
Yeah.
I'm Travel Bank and Brex. Those are a couple others that you mentioned.
Totally.
Let's talk about those.
Yeah. So Brex is an interesting company. Came out of kind of nowhere. Their story is actually fascinating. So they were part of Y Combinator, the startup accelerator in Silicon Valley, and had problems getting a credit card, right? Because foreign founders in the US,
they're Brazilian.
no credit history. No credit history, right? Like all the banks basically said, well, you can get one, but only on a personal loan guarantee. And they're like, why would we do this, right? So they said, like, screw this, like classic, like Silicon Valley style, and started their own credit card. They have built, like, we are happy customers of their company. They have built probably the best business credit card I've ever seen. Right? It's just like such a smooth experience.
I know the founders and I watched them and I got into the funding round too late, but they just, they had like $100 million investment from Masasan at SoftBank, like a $1 billion valuation like a year after they started. It's crazy.
Yeah, exactly. And they're doing it really, really well. And then funny enough, through Brex, we found a travel provider called Travel Bank, which does business travel. Phenomenal company, amazing customer support, like super nice interface. We do all our, and like similar to you, I travel a lot, so we do a lot of like our travel. Like we just outsource this to them and have them do all of our travel now. So again, there is largely, like if you look at anything in your company, like the recommendation I have is like, if you look at anything in your company and you feel like, well, we spent more than like, I don't know, like an hour's worth of time on it, just take that function, let's say it's for example travel, go on the internet, type travel as a service, and just see what comes up, right? Because I guarantee you someone's doing it for you.
One last one that we talked about earlier is Zendesk.
Yes.
So talk about Zendesk.
Yeah, customer support, right? So again, like customer support, a lot of companies know it's important. They spend an enormous amount of time on it and cost and effort. And Zendesk is interesting because they started out originally as a software provider, right? So they basically gave you good customer support software where you can like ask questions and such. They are now doing full service customer support, where you can actually, if your customer support volume increases, you can actually go to them, train them up on your product, and they work with service providers where you have basically your own customer support team, where you don't do the customer support anymore. At least like first, second level customer support, and then they escalate only in cases where they can't solve. And again, like minimal cost. Also, always, it's never fixed cost. Typically, never fixed cost, right? You don't have this like, oh, we don't have anything happening in customer support, but yet we have 30 people we need to pay for. But you just pay for what you use.
Amazing. And it's just, I cannot stress enough the magical time that we're living in. And by the way, if you're looking for one of these infrastructure providers and you can't find someone providing that type of infrastructure,
build it.
Start it. It's an opportunity.
Totally.
Yeah.
Or if you find someone who you don't like, where you're like, oh my God, that service sucks, like build it, right?
It's look for problems. They're great opportunities.
Absolutely.
So Pal, this is amazing and super exciting. I love to go to our community for questions. We haven't even really talked about open innovation. We're sort of talking about it around it and so forth, but let's do that.
Sounds good.
And I may pump in a few more questions. So. Let's go to Jerem for some questions from our beloved community here.
Awesome. Our first question is from Greg, and he asks how you recommend innovative sprinting in a startup versus a large company with thousands of employees. What's the difference in a sprint between those two?
Interesting. I think it's largely mindset and resources, to be honest. So mindset being, in a small company, you're typically very frugal, you're like resource limited. So what you tend to do is in a sprint is you tend to be less process driven. So if you're in a startup and you come up with like a full like agile scrum process sprint, please don't do it. You're overkilling it. Whereas if you're in a big company, you just need to realize that in a company you have processes, you've got structures you need to follow, etc. So you probably want to follow one of the better established methodologies such as Scrum or Agile or any of the like Lean Startup or any of the other methodologies. In a startup, what I would do is I would try to ruthlessly, we teach this to big companies as well, but it's harder to get them to do it. But in a startup, I would ruthlessly try to figure out, in terms of like thinking about like a little bit like the scientific method, what is the challenge you want to tackle? What is the hypothesis you need to prove true or not true? And what is the cheapest, quickest way to get there? And when you think you found it, ask yourself, is this really the cheapest and quickest way? Because I guarantee you can typically like shave off a little bit of efficiency there. Again, we try to get this into bigger companies. They have classically the problem that they've got too much money.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Jerome, next question, please.
Sure, this is from Nathan. He asks, what do you think of acquisitions as a way of innovating? Should I be purchasing companies I perceive as a threat? And what best practices can he follow?
Great question.
When doing
That's
that?
an awesome question. I'm actually curious to hear your view on this as well.
Yep. You first.
Yeah, please. So I think acquisitions are an incredibly powerful tool to expand your innovation portfolio. The challenge with acquisition is always the integration, right? Like when you look at the stats, the pure stats show that most acquisitions fail because you have integration issues. If you're a big company, you acquire a small company, like I guarantee you the people in the small company will die inside of your big company because like you just suddenly throw like process at them which they can't deal and so on and so on. So it's tricky to do right, but if you get it right, it's an incredibly powerful tool.
Yeah, I'll add. So when you're buying a small company because you love them as a growth opportunity, what you really love is the team that built that. And that team joined a small company, or that CEO and entrepreneur started that company because it was their dream, it was their passion, and they don't want to work for a large company. And in fact, if you bring them in all the way, you're likely to actually have the majority of the team or a significant portion of that team leave, and the entrepreneurial CEO leave, and then you just crush the soul out of that company. So I have had friends of mine who have sold their company to a large company, and people started leaving, and then the company basically shut it down, and then they rebought the company back, and they built it back up, and they sold it to another company. And this is a cycle that can repeat itself again. So how do you get around that? Part of it is, can you buy a minority of the company, gain access to what you want, so the ability to say, listen, you own this company, it's yours, we're going to buy 20%, we're going to give you the fund, and we're going to become a marketing channel for your product, or we're going to co-develop products together, but the upside is yours, the leadership is yours, we need these little few things are important to us, access to your R&D, access to whatever it might be. So it's really important. Do not kill the golden goose.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mary says that she's seen a lot of companies with a new C-suite title called Chief Innovation Officer. Do you think that every large company should have a Chief Innovation Officer?
Oh boy. I find it, so in lots of ways I find it actually a good thing that like we're taking this serious and companies invest into it. My fear is always a little bit, and I've seen this play out in many companies, is when you have someone who has that title, there's a tendency for the company to believe that all the innovation happens there. And the challenge is, of course, the innovation needs to happen everywhere. The best chief innovation officers I've seen are actually disseminating the innovation work throughout the whole company. So the best ones I've seen actually have tiny teams. They force themselves to be, like frugal. They starve themselves in a lot of ways, where they force themselves to then go into the company and make sure that the whole company innovates.
Yeah.
The worst ones I've seen are the ones who are like, have huge budgets, have their own teams, etc. Because then again, like you push innovation into a corner, and the rest of the company can lean back and say, we don't need to innovate because these guys are doing it, right? So,
Sure.
Gotcha. Nima asks, do you think you could see a future where companies like Apple and Amazon go under? Are they indestructible in this new economy?
That's a great question.
Brilliant. So if you've ever heard me rant about Apple, and this is my personal view, this has nothing to do with Singularity University.
I'm looking forward to this.
Nothing to do with A360. I ask myself, like, quite frankly, over the last 10 years, what has Apple actually done, which is really innovative, right? They've brought out the iPhone, and then kind of it is it. And I think it has a lot to do with the unfortunate demise of Steve Jobs. Steve leaving us. He was an incredible innovator. and really push change forward. The same is not true for Amazon. I think Amazon, particularly under the specific leadership of Jeff, is insanely driven. And what I love about Jeff is, so there's a very famous saying in Silicon Valley by a gentleman called Scott Cook, who's the founder of Intuit. It's probably, in my view, one of the best CEOs we have in Silicon Valley. He said that success is a powerful thing because it makes companies stupid, because they become less and less innovative. And Apple seems to be a little bit too successful for their own good. And Jeff did this incredible thing, which you might remember is about a year ago. He said, I actually believe that Amazon won't be here in 20 years. And I think that he doesn't believe that. I want to believe that he doesn't believe that actually. But by saying this, he makes sure that everybody in the company hears the message that you have to keep at it, because otherwise it won't be there in 20 years.
Yeah, it was amazing. I had a shareholder making that announcement. I think it was 30 years he said that we're going to be gone. And one of the interesting things, because I'm very long Google and short Apple mentally because of the fact that Apple is a very closed system.
Yep.
And I use their technology. I love their technology, but the ability for them to always be the cutting edge of innovation is limited by their employee base versus going open source.
Yep, 100%. I'm completely with you.
Great. Next up is Robert. He says, you spoke to the future of retail being an hourglass shape. Which major retail companies do you think will be phased out by sleeker, leaner companies in the next 10 years? Is the future of retail all online, or do you see a spot for physical businesses?
Okay, so two parts to that question. So first of all, what does disappear? The simple answer to that is, I could rattle down a list of companies, like again in the fashion industry, you've got The Gap, you've got J. Crew, JCPenney. In the UK, you've got Topshop, you've got Abercrombie & Fitch, you've got
That's pretty good.
Victoria's Secret. Yeah, we studied all of them, right? And they're all struggling because they're stuck in this middle thing. And then, of course, the same replicates itself into other industries or other sectors, like electronics and so on. Again, like what we see is specialty retail is doing really, really well, as well as mass retail is doing well. So in fashion, Primark is doing exceptionally well, and our friends from Allbirds are doing really well. Now, the second part to the question was, where do we actually see this going, and what do you do about this, and does physical retail disappear? I don't think so. I think that what happens with physical retail is actually physical retail is in some ways is growing in the specialty retail. So it's really about experiences. Malls, like your box standard, strip mall, they're dying because there's nothing for a consumer to look for, to go to. Specialty retail, which is like an experience, it's combined often with say for example a dining experience, so food experiences, etc. They are growing like crazy. So I'm actually pretty bullish on specialty retail and experience retail. I'm in your language, I'm like long on those, and I'm short on malls.
Let's sneak in one last question.
All right, we'll end with a more fun general question from Kiera. She wants to know what books and podcasts you are reading and watching right now.
So I read everything Peter puts out. In all honesty, like totally honest.
Thank you.
I love the A360 community. I love all the videos you put out there.
Thank you, buddy.
They're definitely one of my pieces of diet. I actually don't read all that much books anymore. I've shifted my diet much more to read long-form blog content, which I find which by the way is ironic because we're writing a book at the moment, but different story. Generally speaking, so other than everything Peter puts out, there's a thing called The Exponential View, which is a newsletter written by Azim, which I love and find fascinating.
And written by who?
Azim Azar.
Okay.
It's a phenomenal newsletter. It's kind of like a really good condensed version. It reminds me a lot to yours. Different area. He's much more looking at like the socioeconomic impact of technology. Andrew Ning of Stanford University has a thing called deeplearning.ai. They've got a newsletter there, which is very specific around the AI community, which I love. I read the standards like MIT Tech Review and of course everything Singularity puts out. But this is kind of like my information diet.
Pascal, listen, an honor and a pleasure. I love who you are in my life and in the SU community. Thank you for all that you do. Where can people follow you? And you do coaching as well for CEOs.
Yeah,
Talk
we
about
do
that for 1 minute.
Yeah, we do a bunch of stuff. So you can follow me probably the two places to follow me is I write a newsletter which is really geared towards entrepreneurs called theheretic.org, where you can just sign up.
The Heretic.
Heretic, one word,
Yeah.
.org, where post, every couple of days I post like something hopefully interesting.
I'm sure it is.
The other thing is all our work we put under the umbrella of an organization called Be Radical. So if you go to beradicalgroup.com,
Spell that. So it's B-E?
B-E and then radical, and then group.com.
Okay.
This is where you find all our work. We put very similar to you. We're really huge believers in like putting our work out there. So we share all our research. There's tons of videos of our stuff on there. So that's probably the easiest way to find stuff.
Nice. Thank you, pal.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody. Hope you enjoyed this webinar. And those of you who are members of the SU community, I'm sure you feel like myself. It's great to see you again.
Wonderful to see you. Thank you so much.
Bye now.